Hello there everybody and welcome to the SA Anatomy channel. My name is Savvy and for this video I am going to be working on a dog rig. So if you'd like to know how I made this rig, then stick around and I'll talk you through my process and I'll show you how I got this rig in the end. Rigging is a lot easier than most people think. It's literally just blocking out the skeleton of your character. So sometimes what I like to do with some characters that I work on or some creatures that I work on, I actually have a skeleton asset that I use to guide me when I'm actually creating the rig. At least blocking out the armature is the easiest part of creating a rig. You are just following the shape of the character that you're working on or the creature. So like I said before, you can use a skeleton mesh and just use that as a guide. The tricky parts of rigging is usually when you start getting into custom controllers, drivers, and other kinds of systems. Eventually you get used to the process and you've done this before, so you know how to do it for your next rig or your next character that you'll be working on. Usually when I start working on a rig, just the same as when I'm working with sculpts, I like to figure out what I'm going to use it for in the end. If it's just going to be for posing, quick and easy poses, then it's better for you to just make a quick and easy rig. For this one, I didn't really go that route. It was just supposed to be for posing, but at the same time, I wanted to figure out how to get something close to like an advanced rig, something I could experiment on or experiment with and revisit in the future, and probably something that I could use to guide me in the next rig that I worked on. And this isn't really rigging 101, so it's not an entire crash course on how to rig. This is just how I came up with this dog rig, and you could probably learn a few things from my processes. And I am going to revisit this rig later on in the future. There are a few things that I'm going to adjust. There are a few things that I'm going to change. Perhaps I've learned new techniques or new things in the future, and then I'm going to open this file again and I'm going to change it up a little bit. I don't usually think that everything that you work on is completely complete, like absolutely completed is perfect. I like to revisit some of my old work, see where the mistakes are and how I can improve on it on the next iteration or the next project that I work on. So you're always kind of learning. There's always something new that you pick up. I learned a couple of new things with this rig, for example, which I used in other rigs that I created for characters, human characters, and I found ways to improve them, and obviously I'm going to come back and then improve them on this rig as well. So it's your own little playground. You get to do whatever you want with this. You get to learn as much as you can and then you improve on it. Whilst I'm blocking out the character's rig or the creature's rig, I like to just make sure that I've named everything correctly, because sometimes I know myself that I tend to forget. So you might finish the rig and then you have to rename everything. And imagine now, it's easier for you to rename 50 things, but let's say now you made a super advanced rig with so many bones. Now you have to like rename everything, unless you have like a batch rename add-on or plugin that you can use, that's fine. But I just like to do it as I'm blocking out. It's also just to keep everything clean and neat as possible. Imagine now you finish this rig and you have to export it to a game engine like Unity or Unreal. And then now you're trying to find a specific bone, and now all the bones are just named bone.001, 002, 003. So it's going to be a lot easier for you to work with this rig if you just name everything properly from the beginning. And in Blender, if you name everything properly from the beginning, then it's easier for you to just use symmetrize. You can just make your life easier by doing that. One thing I'll have to say that I do a lot whenever I'm working on character rigs or creatures is I always have these pectoral muscle adjusters or just these pectoral adjustment bones. It just helps me to basically control the muscles a lot better. I sometimes have them on other muscle groups as well, but it's usually in the chest area. I usually have them around there, and sometimes I'll have them on biceps, but I like to do shape keys. I use shape keys or blend shapes for other muscle groups. So, and then I'll just hook it to a driver. So if the character is flexing, then I can have the shape key actually bump up that part of the mesh. I don't do it for this one. I'm not going to use shape keys on this rig. I wanted to just focus on the rig and then just have the mesh deform, and that's all that it did. Now that we're getting into the IK systems of the rig, that's when I am starting to plan everything out properly. I'm trying to see, okay, how can I get this to work the way I want it to work? Personally, working on a rig with an IK rig that has more than 2 joints has always been really difficult for me. So I took this opportunity to try and learn a few more things. I've done multiple joints before, but usually I want to keep it as loose as possible. But I really wanted to make sure that I got this as close to perfect as possible. So I decided to experiment a lot with this rig. And honestly, just at this point where we have the legs set up, we have the entire body set up, you can honestly leave it at this point if you just want the rig to be posed, and that's about it. If you know that you're not really going to be using it for anything else. I wanted to take it a step further and see if I can get it as close to an advanced rig. For most of my rigs, I like setting the IK chain to also copy the rotation of the IK bone. Makes it a lot easier for me to control the entire chain and the orientation of most bones. So what I'm going to do for the front legs is I'm just going to copy one of the legs and then bring it down to where the IK bone meets the IK chain. Then I'm going to have that as the main IK bone, rather than having the paws bone be the actual IK bone. This is mainly because I wanted the IK chain not to be disturbed when it's in rested mode or rested position. This is because the paw bone's rotation is obviously different from the rest of the other bones. So I just wanted to copy one of the bones and then use that as the IK bone. Preferably, obviously, you're going to copy the bone that starts the IK chain and then going along that chain. For the pectoral adjustment bones, it's really simple. I just make sure that they're facing the right direction forward. Then I applied a stretch constraint onto it and made sure that it was always stretching towards one of the arms. So I didn't want the stretch bone to go too far, because it's always going to try and stretch to the end of your bone or the target bone. So I just had another bone which acts as the target bone for the stretch bone. Then that target bone is now parented to one of the arms. And this obviously allows the bone to stretch to the arm without it exceeding its limit. For the face, I knew that I wanted to have a little more control over the eyelids, the dog's eyelids. So I'm going to create just a small chain of bones, just going around in a loop. Then I'm going to do the same for the eyebrows and just make sure that it's just kind of shrink wrapped onto the face. Some of these bones you can have custom controllers for. You can have all kinds of drivers set up or all kinds of systems set up for you to be able to work easier. Just like I said, if you know that you're really not going to need it that much or you're not going to use it that much, then there's no need for you to go to the extreme. So I've done face rigs before, my own kind of custom face rigs, and I know how to basically just make it do what I wanted to do. So I knew that just for the head, I'm going to revisit this again, but I knew very well that this was okay. I wasn't going to get a lot of deforming from the head unless I really wanted to go super detailed with it. So now I'm happy with what I have. I've already made the custom shapes. Now I'm just going in and actually weight painting the character. Well, I used auto weight painting for this one. Usually when you're weight painting characters, usually the characters that have a lot of accessories are sometimes the hardest ones to work with. So because this is just a dog, it doesn't really have any extra parts, it's just one mesh. It's a lot easier to use automatic weights, and sometimes you can come up with some really neat tricks or some really cool ways of working with weight painting issues, like for example making sure that you have a character that is completely solid and then weight painting that, then transferring the data from that character to the one with the weight painting issues. So you take your entire character with the clothing, then you basically just retopologize or you dynamesh and make sure that it's all solid, and then you weight paint that, then transfer the data onto the other character. So, but obviously you can see that there's some weight painting issues here. There's obviously going to be cleanups wherever you have parts that are so close to each other and you want to separate them. Obviously the auto weight paint is going to fill both those two parts, like the mouth over here for example. So I'm just going in and making sure that the mouth actually opens up and all the bones that are around the mouth are affecting the parts that I want them to affect. So there's always going to be cleanup. You should always be prepared to do some cleanup when it comes to weight painting, or when it just comes to anything really when you're working in 3D. And again, at this point, this should be fine enough. The deformations work, the rig is functional, you can use it. There's some issues here and there. You can see with the arms, they kind of bend just forward. There's just like some adjustments that you would need to work on, but you can honestly leave it at this point. But I wanted a lot more controls. I wanted to see if I could have some adjustment bones working. I wanted to see if I can work on like different kinds of IK systems perhaps. So if you can see here, I'm actually limiting the rotation of the arms because I want to stop it from actually deforming in a strange way. So you just go to your bone properties, then you find the inverse kinematics option and you change the values from there. So now I want to figure out how to get some automatic shoulder movement. I want to actually have the shoulder adjusting whenever the legs actually move up, the paws actually move up. Then I want the shoulders to kind of rotate to try and adjust to the entire arm's position. So I initially started with a copy location and a damp track constraint, so it can actually try and move with the entire arm, and for the most part it worked. So I just went back in and then just readjusted some of the values, made sure that it wasn't too extreme so that when you moved it up, it didn't just shoot all the way up into the sky, or it wasn't just too much movement. And I did this just by changing the constraints influence. I also made sure that the copy location constraint was only affecting the bone on the y-axis. This is because I knew that I only wanted the bone to only move upwards when the entire arm moves up. So almost like you're shrugging, your shoulders are just being lifted. So you don't really need movement when it's moving backwards or forwards or any other direction. And you can see this when I'm constantly moving the arm out, seeing where the limits are, or where I can put the limits actually. So I knew that, okay, I just wanted it on the top. I just wanted it to move upwards, and that was it. What I do next was I wanted to actually have a different bone that the shoulder could target. So I wanted to see if it will be easier to control the entire shoulder this way rather than it actually following the chain, because you might actually end up in some dependency issues when you're basically having constraints where they follow the same chain that is parented to itself. It's kind of you end up with some kind of weird loop. So the best thing to do is just have a separate bone that you can control, and it isn't being affected by all the other bones that much. So I obviously parented to the paw. So you could also just parent it to the paw as well, but the thing is, the paw is just not aligned properly with the shoulder. This is why I moved the shoulder target a little further, just in front of the paw, so that it's actually constantly looking at that target. You'll get this a lot whenever you're rigging and you're trying to make sure that everything deforms properly. You will kind of just change the position, or you'll change the pose quite a bit. You'll kind of try and your best to break it. What I find is best is actually, I've started doing this a lot recently, is going into just a small animation. Just make a small animation, see how it feels to actually use the rig, and also how it functions. Because if you're making a rig and you're working with other animators, you need to make sure that you're communicating with those animators constantly. You're asking them whether this certain constraint works properly, how they feel about this pole or this certain target bone. You need to make sure that everything actually feels correct and it actually moves correctly at the same time. Because a couple of times I've made rigs before in the past where I knew that I just needed like a character walking, for example. So I'll make a really simple rig, which is fine at the same time. You just have IK on the legs and IKs on the arms, for example. But sometimes if you're working with other animators, most animators want certain switches or certain functions that allow you to switch between FK and IK. So you need to implement that, but at the same time also make sure that it actually still continues to work properly. You also need to make sure that the systems that you're applying onto the rig isn't destroying the rig at the same time, because you can basically fill the rig up with so much that at some point it just ends up breaking the entire rig, and it's just too difficult to work with the rig. So now I am just focusing on the neck. What I like doing with the neck is having a separate bone, which is the master controller or the master rotation controller at this point. So you can still rotate the neck freely, and I do this just by simply making sure that the mix option on the copy rotation constraint is set to either after original or before original. Because like I said, I still want the freedom to be able to rotate those individual bones, not just having the one controller being the master of all the bones, and that's the only way that I can rotate it. Sometimes you will need that, but in this instance for the neck, there are times where I do just want to rotate just a single bone and not the entire chain. And each bone in this chain will have different influence values. So from the very start, your first bone will have probably the rotation set to max, or the influence set to max, then all the way then the value decreases all the way to the last one. Or you could have it vice versa, depending on what kind of rotations you want to achieve. Now there's just some small adjustments, some small fixes that we have to do, and it's really easy. You just make sure that the master bone is not copying the rotation of the chest or its parent. So now I want the master bone to be the only one that controls the entire chain, rather than the chest being able to control the entire chain as well when the chest is rotated upwards. Then we just do some small housekeeping. Just make sure that the weight painting is correct. Just clean it up a little bit more. Like I said, you're going to be moving your rig around a lot. You're going to be rotating it. See what kind of poses you can achieve, you can get out of the rig. Sometimes, like I said before, try your best to break the entire chain and see, or break the entire rig and see how that works. Then for the entire spine or the entire body, I want the chest to be the main controller. I want to be able to just move the chest and the entire body follows along. So I'm going to make just a simple IK system for the entire body, or just for the spine, and just make sure that you. Now for the mouth, I want the mouth bones, or the top jowl bones, to move automatically when the jaw is open. And the way I did it here was having another target bone a little forward from the mouth actually transform when the mouth is open, so it actually moves to certain positions when the mouth is open, and you can use a transform constraint. And it's really simple. You just make sure that you know, okay, if this is rotating or this is moving forward, then my bone is supposed to do this. Then I have a copy location constraint on the jowls, and I'm adjusting the influence accordingly. And I do that for every bone until I get something believable whenever you rotate the mouth or the jaw, when you rotate the jaw and open the mouth. Now I just want to limit the jaw bone's rotations and also make sure that you can't move the jawbone as well. This is just a safety thing, just to make sure that I don't accidentally move it incorrectly or something like that. I also want to limit the scales as well, just to make sure that nothing goes wrong when I'm animating or when I'm using the rig. And now, as you can see here, just a couple of tweaks later, you can see that the mouth is actually moving properly, and the jaw is also rotating properly. I'm also testing the jowls bones, making sure that even when they're moved, I can still rotate the entire jaw and nothing breaks. So I'm quite happy with how that came out. And as I'm working on everything, I'm also just testing everything that I've actually added. So I'm constantly going back and forth, checking if the constraints work properly, checking if the weight painting is proper. You'll probably go and clean your repaint a couple of times if you're not doing it correctly, or you just overlook something and you just miss something. So you just need to make sure that you're constantly checking everything that you've worked on. So if you saw just before, I was just moving the arms around to see if I pushed them to the extreme, what would happen. Do the shoulders actually move correctly? And it seems like they do. There's still a couple of weight painting things that I need to fix, but for the most part it looks like it's deforming properly. And now I move on to the pelvis. Now I'm just going to add a separate bone that controls the entire pelvis. You obviously don't need more bones for the pelvis, but I like having like a left control and a right control and then a main pelvis control, just for hip movement, for example. So if you want to pose the rig in a different way and then you want the hips to kind of adjust, you want to manually adjust certain things, then it will be best for you to actually separate a few things. But if you're just going for simplicity, then just have one pelvic bone. So now you can see I'm just posing the dog, the entire rig, and you can see here I'm trying to like figure out whether the pelvis or the pectorals actually deform properly as well. And I believe I moved the pectorals. I adjusted the pectorals the same way that I adjusted the mouth target bone or the entire jaw as well. So when the arms are moving upwards, then the pectorals are actually pushing forward just a little bit so that it auto adjusts. And I'm doing that by having another bone that is the main target, then I want to just parent that bone to the chest, make sure that the chest is the main controller. Then that target bone, the pectoral's target bone, will be the parent of the both pectorals. Now you could also use drivers for this system, but with this rig I wanted to stay away from drivers. I've kind of just made the decision at the beginning that I want to get this as advanced as possible just with the rig, without having to use external systems. I told myself if I can get the rig as perfect or as close to perfect as possible, then I think I did great. If I have to use other systems, if I have to use drivers, if I have to use shape keys to adjust parts of the body, then I probably need to look at the rig or need to look at other ways to perfect the rig. And I remember I did mention that when you revisit a rig or whenever you're working on these things, you'll learn new things as you continue making new rigs or making new characters and so on. So I learned that using the armature bone constraint, it is a lot better. Well, it would have been a lot better in this instance. Rather than me having to actually use the constraint, the transform constraint, and adjusting all these values, it would have been easier to use the armature constraint. All the constraint does is you pick out a set number of targets, however many you want, and then you have your bone, the bone that has the constraint, and it will try its best to stay in between those targets. So in this instance I have 2 targets, and my pectoral main bone, my parent bone, will be moving in between those targets. So if one stretches to the side or it moves to the side, then the pectoral bone should have adjusted to kind of try and keep it as normalized as possible. So I wanted to do a similar thing with the pole bones for the arms. It's just easier for me to work with. So like I said before at the beginning, is I wanted as many controls as possible or as many features to this rig as possible without having to actually use a lot of these bones manually. I wanted a lot of things to be automatic. So as you can see here, I want the arms to lift up, but also kind of move outwards, like rotate outwards a little bit so it doesn't actually clip with the chest. I also wanted this feature to kind of help me use the rig without having to, like I said, without having to adjust manually. Now we're getting to this part where I wanted to sort of adjust the bones whenever the rest of the bones are rotated. So if you move the entire arm upwards, then the forearm bone rotates and it moves down, and the shoulder bone actually rotates upwards, just to get that gap in between the joints. This is because whenever you're rotating or you're closing something with a rig like this, usually with just simple rigs, is on the rig it looks normal, it looks fine, but when it comes to the mesh has larger volume, it has larger surface area. So when you're actually rotating these parts and the joints come closer together, then you will see a lot of clipping. So again, you can do this with drivers, and usually I do this with shape keys. So I have the bones stay the same. Then whenever I'm rotating, I usually do these with characters' legs. So when the character is kneeling or crouching, actually, when the character is crouching, then I want the kneecap or the area around the kneecap not to just collapse. So I have shape keys to bump that area out, and then I have a driver set to always just adjust whenever another bone is stretched, or if one of the thigh bones or the shin bones is rotated a certain way. But with this one, I wanted to figure out if I could do it just with the rig, and using the transform constraint. I did figure this out eventually. It was quite tedious, but I loved every single minute of it. I was experimenting on this, and later on I did find a improved version or an improved method, and it's just to kind of have bones in between the joints that act as the joints. So for example, if you have your knees, I'll use that as an example again. Usually you just want a simple two bone system for the thigh and the shin, but for more accurate rotations you would actually have a bone in between those joints. So that bone will act as your knee, your kneecap. So now with some adjusting, you can see that the system actually works. I'm just making sure that everything actually does work properly, the values are correct, and nothing is breaking. So when you're at this point, you could have left this entire rig long ago, but you can see now when I move the front leg upwards, it actually does move properly. And I just want to make sure that the poles are actually moving the correct way, instead of it just letting the arm or the front leg actually clip into the chest. So whenever now you move the arm upwards or the paw controller up, then all the IK bones and the adjustment bones and the tweak bones that I've put here are moving correctly. So it leaves less work for me when I'm animating or when I'm posing. So now I just have to focus on single bones, a singular bone or at least two bones, just to get everything done. So now I'm just going in and just checking everything as usual, posing it, seeing whether things are working properly. I can see the right front leg is just going a little further than the left, so I'm just tweaking whatever I can, changing whatever I can. Then I just want to quickly UV unwrap the dog, because I'm going to bake the high poly mesh onto the low poly, well, mid poly I suppose, or whatever you consider low poly or mid poly. So you can just watch me do that. The hind legs proved a lot more difficult than the front legs. I wanted to have the same system in mind, so I wanted to be able to control the hind legs just the same way as I control the front legs, but because of the way the joints are, it proved a lot more difficult. It's also because of how the bones are typically shaped, or posed in rest position. So if you're working with an IK and you just have a straight chain, you will actually see that the way it rotates is just a little off, or even greatly off. Sometimes it'll completely break. So usually whenever you're working with the character's IK system and you're working with the knees, for example, or the arms, you want to have a little bit of a bend. You want to have the bone, the thigh bone, for example, bent forward just a little bit, and the shin bone obviously adjusted accordingly. That's also one of the reasons why whenever I'm modeling my characters or when I'm making my characters and I have my characters in a T-pose, it's not a full T-pose. So the character will still have a little bit of a bend in the arms. but I usually go for an A pose because an A pose just feels a lot more comfortable and it deforms properly when you're done. A T pose has a lot more that you have to tweak or you have to fix, usually with the weight painting and the proportions of the character as well. So sometimes whenever I'm working on a character, I will make it in an A pose, and then I will later on, after rigging and weight painting and everything, I will pose it in a T pose and then bake that down as an animation and call it the T pose or rest position underscore T pose. Eventually I settled on just a simple IK for the hind legs, but I do plan on revisiting this rig again and seeing whether I can adjust the legs properly. So when we see here, the legs move correctly when you're just moving the entire leg, just the leg itself. But when you actually start moving the entire body, it sort of feels incorrect, and it goes back to what I was talking about, having the bones just a little too straight. You can see with the thigh bone, it's just one straight shoot down. It's going from top to bottom just like that. If I had to revisit this rig, I would try and get the bone to just rotate a little bit. It's not just a straight line. It'll be a lot better for the rig, and it will be a lot better for me to work with the rig. But for this one, I ended up just being okay with just the IK. And now you can see that a lot of these things are starting to come together properly. It's starting to feel like I have a lot more control over all these other bones, and it's a lot easier for me to pose this. It was very simple for me to pose this. I just moved the pelvis down and just adjusted the legs so that it actually looks like it's sitting down. So now we're gonna move on to the face, just the eyebrows and the eyes. So what I usually do with the eyebrows and the eyes, or just the face entirely, I like to have controller bones and then stretch bones, right? So I will have the deforming deforming bones, the bones meant for deforming the mesh. I will have them actually have the stretch constraint onto them, and then they will be targeting the target bones that I will put in between the meet points, or the points where the next bone meets with the previous one. Then it's a lot easier for me to actually move the bones, or just move the face, or mess around with the face however I like. So all I'm doing here is just making sure that the weight painting is correct first before I start adding the controller bones. Then I'm just gonna isolate everything so that I can just make sure that I'm working just on this. I want to make sure that first I bring in those target bones, the bones that I'm going to use, or not the target bones, but the controller bones. So these are gonna be all the points that you move to get a more better like deformation from the face. So the system is really easy. The method is really easy. It's not that complicated. So as you can see here, I've drawn it out. So bone 1 will be a child of parent 1, bone 2 will be a child of parent 2, and bone 3 will be a child of parent 3. Simple. Then bone 1 will have the stretch 2 constraint to parent 2. Bone 2 will have the stretch 2 constraint to parent 3. Bone 3 will have the stretch 2 constraint to parent 4. It's really simple. There's not much to do after that. You just have to like make sure also that the parents are just correct. Otherwise you'll have like a weird effect. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the eyebrows. I'm going to do it for the eyelids as well here. Then we are basically done. You can adjust it a lot more, but there's not much that I wanted to do with this. Just make sure that the maintain volume option is set to none, otherwise it will start to stretch and it'll kind of expand a little too much. So just make sure that maintain volume is kept off, and also, well, unless you needed to do that, but also make sure that the controller bones that are moving the stretch bones, that are the parents of the stretch bones, their only parent should be the main bone that you will control everything with. In this case, it's the head. So make sure that all those bones, all the controller bones, are parented to the head. They are children of the head. If you did everything correctly, it should look a little like this. So that feels a lot better to me. It feels like I have nice control over the eyelids. It feels like I can work with it a lot easier. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something. See you in the next one.